I get it, there's a ton of telescope kits on Amazon that look amazing in the photos, but when you finally set them up on the balcony you're left staring at a blurry mess and a stack of confusing parts. I've been there, tangled up in a mount that never quite balances, or fighting with a focuser that refuses to stay put, and I know the frustration of spending money on gear that sounds perfect on paper but ends up gathering dust. That's why I'm diving into the Askar V modular telescope set today, so you can avoid the guesswork. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, the Askar V is marketed as a modular system that can flip between a 60mm and an 80mm aperture, with a bunch of accessories like a reducer, flattener, extender, and a 360-degree rotator. The idea is to give you flexibility without buying a whole new telescope for each type of skywatching you want to do. In practice, that flexibility is both the biggest selling point and the part that can trip up newcomers. Let's talk about who actually benefits from that modularity. If you're a hobbyist who likes to switch between wide-field Milky Way shots and tighter planetary views, the ability to slide in a reducer for faster exposure times on deep sky objects is a genuine time saver. The flattener helps keep star fields from curving at the edges, which is something you notice when you try to stitch mosaics together. On the other hand, if you're just getting started and you know you'll spend most of your evenings looking at the moon and a few bright planets, you might not need all those extra pieces. In that case, the added complexity can feel like a lot of moving parts you'll never really use. Setting up the Askar V is fairly straightforward if you follow the instructions step by step, but it's not as plug-and-play as a single aperture refractor. The base comes with a new scaled 360-degree rotator that lets you align the camera sensor or eyepiece precisely, which is handy for astrophotography. However, the rotator does add a bit of extra height, so you'll need a sturdy tripod or mount that can handle the extra leverage without wobbling. I tried it on a mid-range equatorial mount, and the balance was okay for the 60mm configuration, but the 80mm lens pushed the center of gravity forward enough that I had to add a small counterweight. That's something a beginner might overlook until they try the larger aperture. One of the real-world strengths of the system is the triplet APO design used in both the V60 and V80 objective lenses. Triplet apochromats are known for reducing chromatic aberration, meaning the colors stay tight around bright stars and planets. When I pointed the 80mm version at Jupiter, the banding was virtually non-existent, and the cloud belts came through with good contrast. The 60mm lens, being lighter, let me move quickly between targets on a clear night, which is great when you're chasing a meteor shower and want to cover a wide swath of sky without swapping equipment. The included reducer is another practical piece. By cutting the focal length, you get a wider field of view and can capture more of a nebula in a single frame. I used it for the Orion Nebula and shaved off about 30% of the exposure time compared to the native focal length. That translates into less tracking drift and cleaner stacks, especially if your mount isn't the most precise. The extender, on the flip side, lets you increase magnification for planetary work, but it does introduce a slight loss of brightness, which is expected. If you plan to do serious planetary imaging, you'll probably want a separate high-power eyepiece anyway, so the extender feels more like a convenience than a necessity. Now for the practical weaknesses. The biggest hidden trade-off is the sheer number of adapters and rings required to switch between 1.25-inch and 2-inch visual adapters. While the kit includes the necessary pieces, each time you change from a camera to an eyepiece you have to unscrew and rethread a couple of components. It's not a huge time sink, but it does add friction, especially in cold weather when your fingers are stiff. Another point is the overall weight. The modular design means each component is built to attach securely, but that also means the combined system can be a bit hefty for a backpacking session. If you're planning to hike up a dark site location, you'll need to factor in the extra bulk of the reducer, flattener, and rotator. Value for money is where the Askar V really tries to stand out. The price point is higher than a single-purpose refractor, but you're essentially buying 2 telescopes plus a suite of accessories in one package. For someone who wants to explore both visual astronomy and entry-level astrophotography without buying separate setups, the cost starts to make sense. However, if you're only interested in one niche, say, just wide-field nebula imaging, you might get more bang for your buck by buying a dedicated fast refractor with a built-in field flattener instead of retrofitting the Askar V. So,